Commercially Oxford Talbot Rising. Addiction to opioids, from prescription drugs like OxyContin to heroin to synthetics like fentanyl, has become a national epidemic. In 2016, 2,089 Marylanders died from drug overdoses, and 10 of those were from Talbot County. In the first 7 months of 2017, Shore Regional Health, which serves the 5 mid-shore counties, had 98 overdoses treated in the emergency department, and 23 of those were from Talbot County. Everyone thinks this trend is increasing. It's not going away. Experts expect 2,500 deaths. That's a mind-boggling number in Maryland this year. Today we have with us county officials from health, law enforcement, and corrections who have come together to coordinate the fight to end this scourge that they see afflicting people across race, gender, economics, or age. Dr. Frida Wadley is the health officer for the Talbot County Health Department. Sheriff Joe Gamble is Talbot County Sheriff. Kelly Reynolds is the problem-solving court coordinator for the Circuit Court of Talbot County, and Doug Devenins is the director of the Talbot County Department of Corrections. Thank you all for coming here today. So let's just start by giving us an overview of the problem. What drugs are causing the greatest damage, and who's taking them?
Well, we have to say that although there's many drugs involved, I think the one that we're most concerned about now are the opioids. And because we've seen that steady increase for so many years, but then recently, the past 2 or 3 years, a really big increase. So that's the one we're most concerned about. That's the one that the governor in March said we're declaring a state of emergency. You can say that this epidemic of opioids is non-discriminating, okay, because we're seeing it not just in the urban areas, but the rural areas that have been hit very hard. We're seeing it both sexes, all races, all age groups, and all economic levels. In fact, some people are very shocked to find out the biggest increase in an age group has been the 45 to 64-year-old group.
That's so shocking. Isn't it interesting?
And then,
that was interesting.
you know, not even the babies are being affected, okay? Every 25 minutes in this country, a baby is born that goes into withdrawal. A good study was done taking the babies that did not go through withdrawal, and they found 1 in 4 had still been exposed to like opioids, marijuana, alcohol in utero, okay? So it's affecting the entire country. It's affecting all of us that's in government. It is taking tremendous resources, but it's also taking tremendous human potential.
So what's the impact on enforcement? I mean, you must be seeing this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for us as law enforcement, our law enforcement is kind of changing now because of this opioid epidemic, where we're trained in Narcan use. I know we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but it drives all of our crime. So addiction, whether it's opioids or alcoholism or any other addiction, it basically drives our crime. All our property crime, our burglaries of our houses, sheds, cars. People are stealing money to buy drugs, and
is that changed in the last couple of years? I mean,
no,
we had drug issues.
Yeah, we've had drug issues with the crack cocaine. When crack cocaine was exploding in the 80s, but there was more violence associated with that, where it was a much more violent drug time. There were more robberies, murders. There are here in Talbot County. It's property crimes. And then it impacts child abuse. I mean, it impacts the other crimes. Addiction, whether it's opioids or anything else, it really impacts. It's the reason police have jobs. It really impacts every aspect of our community.
So what are you seeing among the inmate? I mean, obviously, then that must mean that a lot of the folks that end up in jail have drug issues. So,
well, as the sheriff noted, this epidemic has affected law enforcement and police work and how they're going about their business. It has also affected corrections. And so virtually every local jail has now become a social service center. We function as a detox facility, a mental health facility, an addictions counseling facility, and it's part of our mandate now. It's not just something nice that we do, but we offer a variety of treatment services to the inmate population so that while they're incarcerated, if they wish to begin the process of recovery, they have that opportunity. We can't force them to do it. It's got to be something that they want, and oftentimes they do. After they have the opportunity to get sober and sit there and look at their situation, then that's when they come and ask us what program they can participate in.
What percentage of folks in the inmate population would you say have addiction issues?
We know that a solid 85%
Wow.
of the people incarcerated in our detention center have an addiction issue to alcohol, drugs, or both. And oftentimes that's coupled with a co-occurring mental health disorder.
Right.
So it's a very challenging population, and we do offer treatment to cover all those bases, if you will, whether it's alcohol, drugs, and of course the mental health issue.
Wow. So talk to me about what's going on in the courts, because that must be you all are working together to try
Absolutely. It kind of flows as the person is finding and using the drugs and then becoming arrested and filtering through corrections. Eventually they become involved in the judiciary and the legal process of things. What we try to do here in Talbot County with our problem-solving court is identify really early on if it's a drug-related crime. So the burglaries, the thefts that the sheriff mentioned, we try to identify if those defendants do in fact have a drug-related fueled crime. If they do, then we act very quickly in the early stages of the legal process to identify if they could benefit from our services. The program that we have does a lot of wraparound services. We're able to obtain resources to connect them to so that they can be successful in the community instead of remaining incarcerated for longer periods of time. We work hand in hand a lot with the detention centers. People are coming out, whether they bail out early in their process or whether they're coming out on a modification from lengthy sentences. But we try to connect them to the resources so that they can be successful. That's the bottom line.
So why is there such a huge increase in overdose deaths?
There's, number one, you got more people addicted, but I think we started seeing the overdoses because of the synthetics, the fentanyl and carfentanil. And those are so much more potent than your morphine or heroin.
And do people even know they're getting it? And, I mean,
Now,
that's when
street drugs are like Russian roulette, okay? They're not FDA approved,
Right,
okay?
right.
Or the strength. You can be taking pure heroin, not cut with anything, and often it is cut, but you have just a little bit of one of these, and that's the reason you quit breathing very quickly. Often they find them with the needle still in their arm. They haven't finished injecting, okay? They will say compared to morphine, fentanyl is 1,000 times more potent, and carfentanil, which is used to sedate elephants, up to 10,000 times. So I think the introduction of that has really caused the overdoses, especially in Maryland, more fentanyl than carfentanil.
Oh, wow. And is heroin the street drug of choice at this point? Is that kind of what's out there mostly, or is it?
Well, the street drug of choice is marijuana.
Yeah.
I mean, marijuana by far outweighs any other drug on the street right now. Our arrests and our tickets or citations, since they changed the law of the under 10 grams is a $50 ticket. 60% of any drug offense that we see is marijuana. Cocaine, there's still cocaine, there's still powder and crack cocaine out there, heroin and pills. People are selling pills. They're selling their pills that they're being prescribed. They're getting illicit pills. So the opioids probably only account for about 25% of what we're doing, but you have to understand that everybody that gets to heroin, basically, and all the interviews that we've done with people, and the path to addiction for our kids is early drinking, marijuana that becomes daily use. Somebody introduces them to prescription opiates and then heroin, because they get addicted. It's the same drug.
Right.
Prescription opiates are the same as heroin. It does the same thing to our brain. Parents don't understand. 90% of parents don't understand it. They don't
Right,
get it.
right.
They know we have a heroin problem. They don't get that the prescription opiates are the same drug.
Right.
and the kids don't get it, don't understand it, so they're lulled into this. They become addicted to that. They can't get the pills anymore.
So
the
but
heroin's
there's been
cheaper.
so much about prescription drugs and getting rid of your prescription drugs. Is that just message just hasn't gotten out there, or and
Yeah, I don't think the message has gotten out there. I'm still giving talks. I mean, I've given over 100 talks in the last 5 weeks because of the Talbot Goes Purple stuff, and 150 before then. And my test is, raise your hand if you talk to your kids about drinking, driving, texting, and driving, seatbelt use. Every hand in the room goes up. Raise your hand if you talk to your kids about prescription opiates. 10% goes up.
wow,
They don't even know, a lot of parents don't even know what a prescription opiate is, the
Yes.
painkillers,
it's
right?
the Percocet they got.
It's
for
Percocet, Vicodin,
Yeah,
Oxys,
yeah.
all that stuff. So we have such a long way to go. Just 2 years ago, people wrote an editorial about me saying I was making this up.
Mm-hmm.
The heroin epidemic up in Talbot County when I was running for office. I mean, that's how far behind we are in education.
Wow, wow.
So,
But I would say progress has or is being made.
no, absolutely.
You made a very important point in that people are under the perception that people are being locked up for marijuana and marijuana possession. That's really not the case anymore. The people that are incarcerated are far more serious addicts and criminals than that. So let's get that on the table. The other thing is the people that we do a urinalysis on every individual coming into the detention center. So the sheriff's numbers again are reflected in our population. That the most common drug you see in a urinalysis on an intake is marijuana. But then we have 12 other types of drugs that are prevalent and commonly used, and most of them are polysubstance abusers, or they're hot for more than one illicit drug.
Wow. Wow.
So.
Wow.
Absolutely, I'd have to agree. About 85% of our participants have primary substance use is opiates or heroin, and then we have a number of polysubstance users that they have secondary substances that they like or use when they're not using the heroin, and they range from marijuana to cocaine, methamphetamines, amphetamines, and alcohol. But definitely, we have a large percentage of the opiate users.
Who's most at risk? Who's the vulnerable?
Well, I agree with the sheriff when he says that teenage brain, and it's not just teenage, it's like up to mid-20s. Frontal lobe is just not wired entirely yet, although 16-year-olds like to think they're grown.
Right.
Just ask 'em.
And so those adolescents are tremendously at risk, and that's the reason we want to focus on them for prevention. As Doug mentioned, we recognize over and over again that people with mental health problems are at risk. They're treating themselves, they're numbing or feeling better, okay? We know there's a genetic tendency in some families, okay, that if one is an alcoholic or a drug user, you better watch, you may become more easily addicted, okay? We talk about those with stress, not just stresses within poverty. Stresses all across the income level can be different things. But I think even though we know some are at higher risk, I like, along with the sheriff, to say, don't ever think you're not at risk. You can take it long enough, and a lot of people have because they had a sports injury or back pain and they took it for a month, 2 months, and so that risk is for everybody. There's just those that ought to be super cautious about taking opioids.
I guess just how addictive are these? I mean, how quickly does one?
They've actually shown, especially if you have a tendency, a prescription for 5 to 7 days, as small as 5 days, you can become physiologically addicted. Now, people don't think about that. That's prescribed. You're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
So then you think about people that take opioids for 2 or 3 months, and you begin to see how that can be a real problem.
Right. And is that where you're seeing we were talking a little bit earlier about the older population, 45 to up. Obviously, that's not the young, unmolded 16-year-old brain. What's going on with them?
Well,
Because that's so interesting.
yes, and there's theories about it, okay? Like, for example, they're a group that might go in with more back pain or that type of thing for opioids, okay? Some have even linked it to our economy in that a lot of this middle class that were blue collar and had jobs, and with the recession, not only lost their job, but they lost maybe their home and that mortgage and everything. So they're now calling that group death by despair, because we're seeing so many in that group that we've usually never seen before. Okay, so there's not one reason.
Yeah. It's
And that makes it hard to address in prevention.
Right.
There's just multiple reasons.
Right. So many people call this a disease, and that it should be treated as such, and people shouldn't be locked up. So what are we doing in Talbot? So how do we?
So one of the things that we've kind of tried to change what we're doing as a police department is to, when we do arrest people. A couple years ago, I met with Frida's peer support people at the health department. So she has an addictions unit at the health department. She has peer support people that had struggled at one point in their lives and have gotten educational classes on how to support other people that are struggling with addiction. So we're coordinating with our arrest information with them, as well as the overdoses that we get dispatched to, and the EMS gets dispatched to with her office, to try to get those people the help that they need. The problem is this: I'm not a doctor. I don't know if it's what the disease is or isn't. But when people become addicted, they cause problems, and they cause problems in their neighborhoods. And if somebody can stay on these drugs and not have an impact on their neighbors or the school across the street, so we have to be careful in that. Yes, if people are addicted, we need to get them help, but we enable people a lot as well. So we have to be careful that we're not just enabling. Like we arrested a young man for 6 burglaries. He's breaking into houses. That's dangerous stuff. That has an impact. If somebody's home, that has an impact.
Right.
And he went to the district court commissioner's office, and he was released on personal recognizance. He's a full-blown heroin addict. What's he going to do tomorrow?
Right.
He's going to break into houses. So there needs to be, and I don't think we're doing it here in Talbot, I don't think anybody's doing it, but there needs to be an evaluation process at the arrest to say, right at the arrest, and say, hey, listen, this guy is so far gone in his addiction right now, if we turn him loose, we're enabling him, right? He's going to continue with his addiction. There's no stop, there's no ground, there's no bottom for him to start. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that person needs to be incarcerated? They need to get their mind clear enough that Doug can start working and problem solving court can start working. But what's he going to do? He's going to stretch out his court dates for 6 to 8 more months. He's going to get postponements, whether it's through the public defender's office or whether he represents himself. So he's going to go to trial 6, 8, 10, 12 months from now, continue his addiction, continue to break into houses, and that's where violence comes in. So that's an issue that needs to be tackled. That we're not. I don't think anybody's touching that.
Yeah,
issue.
what's the impediment? Because it sounds like you all work pretty close together. What's the impediment to?
Well, the impediment is I can't just refer somebody to the detention center.
Wow.
The district court commissioner, who's paid by the state of Maryland to make decisions on who can stay out on their personal recog and who can't. And this mandate of this Justice Reinvestment Act just came down. That goes into effect October 1st, which me as the sheriff, quite frankly, I have no idea where they're reinvesting the money. I don't think we're saving any money from Doug's shop. Where are they reinvesting? So it was a nice little term, it was a nice little thing that they passed in Annapolis, they think. But how does that play out for us? And how it plays out is they don't want, nonviolent drug offenders shouldn't be incarcerated. Well, yeah, when you're breaking into a house, you haven't hurt anybody, but I worked state police homicide for 17 years, and I can't tell you how many times that little ladies don't answer their door.
Right.
The guy knocks on their door, nobody answers, they kick the door in, and then violence can happen.
Right.
So we need to protect our citizens as well and serve the addicted population. We're not serving them by just saying, all right, we're just going to give you.
Right.
Right.
And even if they're not physically hurt, the mental struggle that a family goes through if their house or their belongings or their vehicle has even been burglarized, they're going to struggle with that, and they're going to have anxiety about it, and they're going to feel uncomfortable in their own home setting once they've been burglarized or thefts have been done on their property. So it might not be physical harm, but there's a struggle for those victims involved. There really is.
As we mentioned before, corrections today is vastly different than it used to be, and that the sheriff indicated that if you turn them back out, that's enabling continuing their addiction. But if you get them incarcerated, at least for a relatively short amount of time, we can get them sober,
Right.
and we can get them on a path to recovery, and we can kind of do a handoff to a community-based treatment provider, whether it's through the health department or some other organization in the community, or it might even possibly involve a problem-solving court.
Right.
But there are alternatives within the system, and the system can work, and in fact it is working quite well in a lot of cases. But as this problem goes on, we need to ensure that more resources are available, and we're not quite there yet with respect to certain critical elements, and particularly as they transition from incarceration back to community.
So I want to talk a little bit about treatment, but I want to talk about Narcan first, because that's like an acute. So tell us about Narcan, because that's something that most of us sort of know about, but not really.
Narcan's been around for a long, long time. It hasn't been in the type that you use in the nasal spray, okay? And what it does is there's receptors on the nerve. Opium or opioid products sit on that receptor and cause their effect, okay? Narcan just comes in and bumps the opioid off, is on the receptor, so that if someone has overdosed and you give them Narcan, then that opioid is bumped off the receptor and they can be revived. Now, depending on the amount that they've had, especially with these synthetics, sometimes it takes multiple doses. And sometimes, like, they're revived, they can be very belligerent. It's like, I'm in withdrawal now, and will not go to the emergency room, will not go into treatment. But what they don't realize is maybe in an hour or so, they can relapse.
Wow.
In other words, if they've got enough in their system, then it'll hit on the receptors and they can actually relapse.
Who can give Narcan? I mean, do you have to? One has to be trained to do that, or?
Well, we contacted, after I became sheriff, we wanted to be Narcan trained, so we contacted Frida at the health department, and their team comes over and trained the police officers. So, I mean, I think Frida said that anybody in the public can be trained.
It started out that general public, you had to come in and have the official training, get a certificate, and then you could get a prescription to get Narcan, okay? Now it's so bad that they've actually got a standing prescription with pharmacists, so that if you want to buy Narcan, you can buy it and never be trained on it, okay?
Right, so I could walk into
You
a
could.
pharmacy and say,
It's about $140 for 2 of those nasal sprays. It comes as a unit, okay? And they did that because there's just not much danger at all to giving Narcan if it's not an opioid overdose, okay? So they figured in the long run it would save more lives if people gave it, even if they did not use it perfectly, okay?
Right. Right. So talk a little bit about the Good Samaritan law. That's important too, right? So people need to know if that...
Right. Good Samaritan law was passed a few years ago. It's a great law. College campuses have had this Good Samaritan law on their campuses for years and years. But Maryland passed it, which basically if we're all at a party and one of us overdoses or has a medical emergency, there's any medical emergency, we call 911, then we can't be prosecuted for most drug crimes. Now, any possession parties that kids would be at, or even adults where they're just mere possession, if there's 3 kilos of heroin on the table, and we're the big upper echelon drug supplier for the Northeast United States, then distribution of heroin to those larger amounts doesn't qualify for it. But you know, it's to protect our kids and our young people when they're not making good decisions at parties and they're
So if
dumping
somebody,
people.
if a kid or somebody's at a party and somebody does something, they shouldn't stop and not call.
Absolutely.
They should call
We
911
just did a
or-
big public service campaign in our schools. We have some posters up in our schools with Fred the drug dog talking and saying, hey, if you have and we partnered up with Frida's a prevention program. You know, it's a cool little magnet kids can have. We're doing some laptop skins and stuff like that, so kids to understand it. We passed the law, but then we didn't attach money. Annapolis didn't attach money to getting this out to the
Right.
people that need to know.
No, right.
You know, and we've had cases in the past in my last job where we had a young lady that was dumped in the woods in Western Maryland. They thought she overdosed. She actually died of exposure. She hadn't died. She didn't die of an overdose, but they thought she did, and they drug her out in the woods, and she died of exposure.
Oh, my.
You know, later because
'Cause
they
they
got
were
scared.
afraid.
They were afraid.
Yeah.
So we need to get that, and parents need to push that message out to their kids. Call 911. You're not getting in trouble, and enter into those agreements with your parent. Parents, enter into those agreements with your kids. Listen,
Right.
you're ever somewhere, the law protects you, and I'm not going to get you in trouble. You know, I won't yell, jump, and scream if you do
Right.
the right thing. Call 911.
Right.
Parents need to discuss that.
So let's talk about treatment, because I think that's a complicated thing too. What appears to work,
Well,
and what kind of facilities, and do we have enough in Talbot County to treat people who have addiction issues?
what seems to work the best as far as long-term, okay, is counseling, support, often from a peer, but also medication. And none of these, this is what is so important, there's not a magic pill that cures addiction. You got it, it's chronic, it's going to always be with you. In fact, you often see the cycles of getting detoxified and relapsing going over long periods. The drugs that's been used the longest is methadone. So that's the one with the most studies on.
People can overdose on that too,
Oh,
right?
yes. And methadone is a long-acting opioid.
It's a narcotic.
Yeah.
It's a long-acting opioid. And it sits on that and it activates that nerve
But you don't have a high from
You
it.
don't get that great feeling from it. It decreases the cravings, but it doesn't eliminate the cravings because you'll often find people on methadone take another opioid to get the high, okay? It may decrease their need for as much, but that's the longest one that's been used. The second one is buprenorphine, and it acts like the methadone too. It gets on the receptor and activates it, okay?
Right.
It's often mixed with something like Narcan, a substance, and that's to sort of decrease the abuse of this, to just use it for a good feeling.
Now, do people stay on that for a long time, or 6 months, or 2
Often,
weeks?
and
or-
that's sometimes where people get into controversy, okay? They say, are you substituting one drug for another? With the methadone, they're often able to go back to work, to function, especially if they don't take those other opioids to get high again.
Right.
The third one is in the biggest way it's used is in an injectable form. You get an injection every month, and it's like Narcan. It sits on that receptor, so if I go out and then get a fix, I don't get a high from it, okay? So if you can get them on that once-a-month shot and keep them on it, and Doug has a program that uses Vivitrol, so he's more familiar probably than anybody in the community.
So, yeah, does it work? Help?
Oh, it works, and we've had some wonderful success stories with it. But we're actually in the detention center. We're using a pill form of Vivitrol called naltrexone, and the reason we use the pill form. Well, let me back up. Naltrexone is actually a drug from the 1970s, when in the 70s that America had a heroin epidemic.
Yes.
But naltrexone didn't catch on because in order for it to be effective, you have to make sure it's taken every day. Well, while a person's in the detention center, we can make sure they take it every day.
Right.
And then when they leave the detention center, we can transition them and get them to a Vivitrol shot, which lasts 30 days. So you don't have to worry about them getting it every day.
Right.
The reason we do that use the pill form in the detention center is because it's far more cost effective
Yes.
than
The
a
shot.
Vivitrol shot. Vivitrol shot can cost anywhere from, I've seen, $1,200 to $1,500 per shot. We can get a month's supply of naltrexone for $24,
Wow.
a little over $24. So it's far more cost effective. And our experience to date has been that it does significantly reduce the craving that an individual feels, so that when they're in a treatment, a counseling session, and we have certified treatment providers in the detention center, they can better focus and better participate on their treatment while they're in the detention center, because they're not, if you will, jonesing for their drug.
Right. But once somebody goes home, isn't that, back in the community? What's the follow-up? I mean, how do you keep that person, as you were saying, there's a lot of high risk of relapses. Are there programs in place
There
for
are
that?
programs. I say there's 3 major care coordination programs in this community. Doug with transitioning back to the community, Kelly with ones involved in court, and then health department often works with those that's coming out of a detox center. We don't have a detox center here, but there's one in Kent County that we use a lot. And it's often to keep them out of the drug environment. You take them from detox, step them down a recovery bed, or at least housing when they're not going right back into the same condition that they got on the drug, okay? And so our 3 units, and I think that's a good place to put our recovery dollars, because we've already invested resources when they're there. We've already invested in the court system. So we really want to follow those over a year if we can,
Right.
to see that they stay employed and stay off the drug.
And that stable housing leads to the stable lifestyle.
Right.
So it really is the foundation for them to begin building up the recovery process. You're talking about treatment, and it's imperative to our program that they're enrolled in treatment, generally in an IOP program, an intensive outpatient program. Right now, all of our participants are enrolled at Shore Behavioral at the hospital for the 3 times a week participation in drug counseling. But then they also have peer support, where, as Frida had mentioned, they're enrolled in appointments with peer support to actually help them through the daily life facets of what they're going through in early recovery. And it hasn't been mentioned, but self-help meetings, that's an integral part of them and their recovery process, and being able to learn to live clean and without the drugs.
Right.
We see huge success once somebody really buys into the recovery process.
Right.
They can be forced to go, but the ones that actually say, you know what, I need to go because this is where I'm going to find stability, people who understand what I'm going through, and people are going to tell me how to live through the little life stressors.
Right.
And we can't forget that as an important part of the treatment process. But for medications, currently we have on average about 20 participants. We have no participants that are on the methadone. We have 1 participant that's taking Suboxone, 1 that's taking anti-abuse, and the ones that we see the most success with are on the Vivitrol shot. They like the once-a-month injection so that they don't have to remember to take that daily pill. We're talking about people who've been used to a lifestyle of using daily, and having consistency or remembering to take a medication, that's not what they're
They
used
do.
to doing.
That's
So
right.
the pill form, we have 1 person that's on the pill form and it's working really well for him, and he knows that he has to take it daily for it to work.
Right.
But most of our participants choose the injection because it's
have to
one
think
less
about it.
thing they have to worry
Right,
about, because it's so much to think about in those early process of getting clean. And when we're dealing with those high risk, high need people that are used to a lifestyle of using and criminal activity, as much support as they can get, that's going to help them do the best.
Right.
And helping with the funding for housing, that removes one less stressor of where they're going to lay their head that night. A lot of our participants don't have stable friends or family. And
Or
what-
they've alienated family.
They've
right.
alienated,
Yeah.
they've caused harm or done legal activity against their friends and family. So they've burnt a lot of bridges. So removing that stressor and worry, and putting in place the recovery housing that we have in our community has really increased, the success in the people in recovery.
I can say though that of the past year, we have been lucky enough with some of the resources to increase the detoxification beds, to see recovery beds increase.
How many do we have? How many detox beds are there?
Well, those are in Kent County,
Right.
okay? And what they did is they had 10 and they expanded to 20.
Right.
And then some new funds, I think, are going to expand even further. And they're just one that we can use.
Right.
But that's pretty much happened in a lot of the detox centers, okay?
Right.
Where we still have a need and have not increased over the past year is outpatient treatment, especially
Absolutely.
when we need someone that has to prescribe a drug, whether it's mental health
Right.
or substance abuse, okay?
Right.
But there's a limited number of providers, and we have real difficulty, the three of us, with individuals that may not have insurance and trying to get them in, and there's a shortage of providers. Providers take the ones with an insurance card first, okay? And then
So are these mostly folks, is it part of the expanded Medicaid?
there's an expanded, and they can have Medicaid, okay? But some of these are not on
Medicaid, right. That's
We have
interesting.
a system that we can go through to sign them up and to pay for the uninsured, but that takes a little time.
Right.
And so we encourage providers to use that will help them get people in, okay? But
That's
all of
interesting.
us can tell you, we still have difficulty when they're transitioning back to the community of having a provider that can see them as soon as they get out and not wait 2 months.
Right.
Especially if there's a mental health issue.
Yes.
Our community is lacking in providers for medications that can prescribe the medications. Luckily, we do have really good therapists in our area, but if there's medication needed for that mental health issue, there is a shortage. Luckily, we do have connections with some providers that can address that issue, and sometimes the family doctor has to prescribe medications while we wait to get them connected. Right now, we have really lengthy waiting lists, sometimes 3 to 6 months to get in to see a prescriber for
Wow.
mental health medications.
And the danger there is they'll go back to self-medicate.
Right.
Right,
And if
right,
they're
right,
not
right.
prescribed the mental health
Right.
medications and have somebody that's going to oversee that they're taking it regularly or address side effects, then they're going to go back to using it, and definitely increases their relapse risk.
Wow.
So,
So does any of that, I know that Talbot got, more than $79,000 from the governor. Is any of that money useful for that?
Yes. In fact, we spent the majority on either getting recovery beds after they come out of one of our networks, okay?
Right.
And that will help some, but we also added that for especially Doug and Kelly, if they have someone that just needs that deposit and first rent, because we're all trying to get
So
them
it is,
into
it's not
employment.
just, it's also finding some place for this person to live. Wow.
which can be difficult
Yeah.
if they have a criminal background
Yeah.
and they're known in the community. It's hard
Yeah.
to find a landlord that will rent to them.
Right.
And we have a shortage of affordable housing
Right.
too, okay?
Right. Right.
So we also set aside a portion that we thought would help us in getting an appointment quicker, okay? That money can be used if the Beacon, the state that sort of manages these funds, if they deny a person, then we can use those funds. That's not nearly as helpful as if we could have said, Doug says somebody's coming out, or Kelly says somebody has been mandated within a certain length of time to get into treatment.
Right.
That's what we hoped we could use it for.
Right.
We can use it only if they're denied after they go through the process.
Is it enough? I mean, it's for 1 year, right? So you,
It's for 1 year.
And do you feel-
this is dollars that's been allocated by the governor, $10 million a year over 5 years. So we at least expect to see these dollars
Right.
continue.
You can count
If
on it.
other resources come in, we use $5,000 for prevention, and that's because it had been legislated that all schools have addiction prevention curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Talbot County Schools, Kelly Griffith already had that
Right.
done, but we used 5,000 so that they could have all of those reviewed, make sure the message is consistent, and then about half of it was for teaching materials.
Wow.
We hope next year, you gotta handle the ones that's dying at your feet first.
Totally, yes.
But eventually we have to get around to using more funds for prevention.
Right.
As Addie Eckert, our senator, said, you can't treat yourself out of this epidemic.
Right, right. So let's talk about prevention and Project Purple. So
Sure.
what is it? I see the
So-
signs everywhere. I saw somebody with a T-shirt. I thought, that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's really cool. So we about a year ago, I was giving a talk to Tidewater Rotary, and after the talk, I met with the president who wanted to help. And my talk was about this epidemic and what we don't know. So she asked me if I would, if they could buy me another drug dog or something. I said, I don't need another drug dog. I already had 2 drug dogs. I said, I need an educational platform, initiative, awareness campaign, because I knew that we don't understand it.
Right.
So started planning about a year ago, and so Talbot Goes Purple is an educational initiative that we're pushing in our schools and throughout the community. The month of September is our purple month, where we're going purple. We have lights. Everybody's seen the lights in town,
Yes,
and so we're going to stay purple for about a month. But the project's not going away. The initiative's not going away. So what we've done is we've been able to speak at about 100 different events and group team meetings, coaches meetings, teacher meetings, just community functions as well. So we're meeting people where they are. One of the things about the prevention is people don't come to prevention stuff. The other night we had Chris Herron come to town, former NBA basketball star. That was kind of our only thing that we asked people to come to.
Right.
And it was great. We packed that about a little over 1,000 people at
Wow,
Easton High
that's
School.
amazing.
And then he also spoke to every kid, 8 through 12, private and public in Talbot and Caroline County. So after we started Project Purple, the judge in Caroline called Judge Newell and said, hey, we'd like to get this Chris Herron, the speaker, over here. So he's spoken to their kids over there in Caroline School. So it's kind of what it's about. We're trying to educate parents, educate kids, and then we started Purple Clubs in the schools. They're sober, safe places kids can, and then the kids can be a part of and say, hey, listen, I'm good as just the way I am. Chris Herron said it well yesterday at his in-school assembly to the kids. He's like, he challenged the kids. He said, why? Why do you need substances?
Right.
Aren't you good enough the way you are? Why do you need substances? So these kids in our Purple Clubs are, they're taking a pledge that we're good enough. We're good enough the way we are. We don't need substances in our life. And then we're having purple events. It's really fun. We're having purple football games at the high school for the actual sporting events. We're bringing speakers in to meet with those kids. It's really exciting. We brought a young lady named Ashley in to meet with the field hockey team. We brought the parents out of the stands. Both field hockey teams came together before the game. Ashley told her story. She looked at the parents. She said, I was the perfect child, straight A student. Went to college on a full scholarship, 3-time NCAA national field hockey champion and All-American.
Wow.
She said, I'm the kid that you wanted. Looked at the parents, said, I'm the kid that you wanted. Then she told the girls on the team, said, I met a boy who was broken. I tried to fix him, and he broke me, and she became addicted for 7 years.
Wow.
And then talked a little bit about her recovery. So we're trying to bring those kind of people in front of the kids to say, hey, listen, moms, dads, kids, it can happen to any of you.
Right.
And here's a girl that you want to be as a field hockey player. She's done it all, and she struggled and fell, and so that's what it's all about. We're going to keep it going through the next 2 school years, reevaluate it. We're planning on going purple again next year in September. And then we just met with all the businesses. No tax money was used. This is all donated money. Eastern Utilities, the newspaper, everybody was on board. Businesses, everybody was on board, and really brought the community together.
Right.
I think that it's really brought a lot of, from Tillman Island to Trapp to Oxford to, all our firehouses went purple. All the towns are purple. So it's really exciting. And it just shows that our community, it's a great community. It just shows, I think, that people are ready for a change.
Right.
People are ready. They're starting to understand it. They're starting to wrap their head around it. And now let's keep plowing forward.
So I have 2 more questions. What's the thing that surprises you the most about this issue? I mean, the lack of knowledge that most.
The lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
For me, it's the lack of knowledge on
Yeah.
parents' parts.
Yeah.
And, parents have to. We can do all we want in the schools to try to educate kids, but if it's not being reinforced at home,
Right.
and parents need to be on this, grandparents need to be on this. The amount of drugs in the medicine cabinet, 65% of our kids that become heroin addicted, it comes from our own medicine cabinets.
Wow.
And we've got, every time I speak to a group of parents or grandparents, I get an email or a phone call later that week says, wow, you're right, I went home and looked in my medicine cabinet. Kids know what's in their parents' medicine cabinets,
Right.
but parents don't know what's in there because it wasn't the game when we were
Right.
young.
Right.
The game's totally changed.
And it's not just the prescribed medications, but sometimes the cough medications
Wow.
that the kids shouldn't be abusing, and they're drinking bottles of cough medicine
Wow.
in order to feel the effects of a high.
So if you don't know what's in your medicine cabinet, or you want to get rid of that old Percocet, what do? You call? How do you get rid of it?
You bring it right to the
Public Safety Center.
Public Safety Center.
There in the lobby, we have a unused medication deposit
Right.
box.
Right. You shouldn't
And-
flush it down the toilet.
No.
'Cause that's not good for our fish, right?
Not good for the bay. Not good for the bay.
Right.
But we have a box there, and then under our medical waste disposal contract, we get rid of that every month. And I will say this, your efforts at education and awareness are paying dividends, because we've been emptying that box a lot more often, and we're using that disposal service a lot more frequently. So we're actually getting rid of a lot of unused and dangerous medications.
Right.
But the
Right.
thing about this that surprises me, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, is the lack of understanding by the parents of the risk that medication presents. And I think part of it is because, well, that's a prescription.
Right.
And it came from a doctor, so
Right.
it's not going to hurt me. They don't understand the danger.
Well,
that
should
that
we be having more
represents.
conversations with our doctors too when they give us this prescription, or the dentist gives us, we've had a tooth removed or whatever, and he gives us, 8 years worth of something.
I
mean, is
believe
that-
so.
yeah.
I believe so. And then there's actually a drug monitoring program now, so that providers who write these prescriptions have to have the training that tells them, back in the 90s, we were going through pain is a vital sign,
sign, yes,
and you're
and-
not treating it, goes to show you swing from one.
I know. I
end
used to
the
write
other.
those stories. I remember as a reporter writing that. Yes, chronic pain should be treated.
But I'm like
And
Doug,
addiction's
the
fine.
average person.
And who pushed that? The drug companies pushed that.
That's
Loved it.
totally right.
The-
Yeah.
to make
And
money.
the docs signed on.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the education is going on and should go on more with those that prescribe.
Right.
And not just watch who you're prescribing to, but, too often they're given 7 to 10 days of a drug they may need 1 day of.
Yes.
okay?
Right.
And so, why prescribe that much? So there's effort that way.
Right.
But I'm with Doug in saying I don't think any age group understands the addictive potential of a prescribed opioid.
Right.
And they ought to be thinking about that, understanding that, and recognizing that ibuprofen sometimes is all you need,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
Plus some other stuff. But once again, as I said, we're a pill-oriented culture in that just give me something to make it go away, and I don't want to do
There's
those
a pill for
exercises.
everything.
Yeah.
Right.
And we talk about, I met recently with some people that wanted, that believe that drug legalization is the answer, to violence in our cities and whatnot. Well, and then I threw it back at them. I said, well, we've done that with
Right.
opioids. We've
Right.
legalized
Right.
opioids, which is heroin.
Right.
It's the same, doing the same thing to our brain.
Right.
And look what's going on.
Right.
I mean, we can't handle it. Our doctors didn't understand it. They were lied to by drug companies, and or the drug companies didn't understand it. But I think they were lied to.
Right.
And it's not like nothing I've ever seen in 30 years of law enforcement.
Wow.
It's just incredible.
Wow.
The amount of pain and suffering out there because of this stuff.
Well, if somebody wants more information, they have a family member or friend who's having some addiction issues, or they just want to help, where do they go?
Talbot County Health Department website has contact phone numbers on it, some information about addiction. Sometimes we get calls and they want to help in some way. We try to link them up, whether it's Prevention Partnership that has something. So they can always call the health department or email.
Okay.
And my direct contact information is on the website.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. So important, and I think, very useful information. Take care.